Oh yeah, ratbags, it's Jade. I showed you guys some of the weather effects that come into SMALLAND. That was only a couple of days ago, but the devs are already tweeting out some more GIFs and clips of what you can expect with seasonal weather. Plus, there's a brand new big interview today. A whole bunch of questions have been answered, so we're going to check this out right now. Let's go. So take a look at one of these little clips of what happens when it rains. I showed you guys what the snow and ice would look like, and now they've released even more. It looks great. The effects of the water on the ground are really making it look really wet, and I love the fact that drops are kind of forming everywhere or falling down stuff. In the original pitch, they did want drops or rain to maybe flood the environment. That was like the game before SMALLAND was actually a proper game, but it does look like now it's more cosmetic. But it still looks fantastic. It really does add that vibe of everything being wet and soaking. We also get a glimpse at some more furniture and different types of crafting benches, as well as roasting mushrooms by the looks of things, and a little bed made out of leaves and a rock for a pillow, as well as possibly some sort of drum. And you do get to see the surrounding environment, some sort of big sewer system, as well as maybe a playground. If that's not a sewer system, it must be the motorway tunnel that we've seen a few clips of, possibly. And then another one this morning showcasing the clouds darkening over, and it does again look great. So many games kind of just turn it on very briefly and quickly that storms roll in, and although this does the same job, you really notice the difference, the changes, and look how much more of the background we get to see. Some sort of log area, possibly a roundabout and some swings, and of course obviously more playground stuff to fly around and mess about with. Again, the ground looks super soaking, and the way the leaves are moving and the foliage, that looks really cool too. And you've got some monkey bars in the background and even another kind of park. It looks like it's been ruined though. Remember, the humans have all been gone for a while now, it seems, and we're going to maybe investigate why or where they disappeared to. It's great stuff, and I'm pleased to say we got an interview to go over it a bit more. This was with Wireframe Game. I am going to paraphrase. You can go check out the full article if you want. I'll leave it in the comment section down below. So it does give it a little backstory to what happened with SMALLAND. And I've covered this before, and I spoke about it in an interview I had with one of the lead designers. That merge pretty much rescued SMALLAND from never really being made and revamped it completely from the ground up. They've had devs working from it from all different places, maybe partly due down to the pandemic, and cultivating it until it is where it is now. And it does say here a couple of members behind the original SMALLAND prototype were actually employed. That's news to me. As far as I'm aware, the original developers had nothing to do with this game anymore. So that's an interesting topic that probably needs a bit more clarification. Maybe it's developers that worked on other parts or other aspects rather than the main creators. But yeah, that is pretty interesting. Effectively, they ended up throwing away everything that was built before. They added a whole bunch of new art, new assets, and it was definitely a different direction. And you can tell that it's very colourful, it's very twee, very cartoony, the original kind of pitch. Whereas SMALLAND now is a little bit more realistic, although it's still quite whimsical, as they're keen to point out. It's not going to be like a hardcore survival game like Ark, it is a little bit more fun. So Averly reiterates some of the story and lore. You're not humans that have been shrunk down, you're actually your kind of own sprite-like race, and so far they're labelling them the small folk. They've been underground for a long time in darkness, sustaining themselves on the roots of trees, fungi and whatever else they could find, but something's happened on the surface of the world and humankind is no longer present. Nature started to grow back, and so the small folk decide to venture out. Effectively, they're going to be claiming and getting back their world. The interviewer from Wireframe talks about positioning of camera and how important it is, especially when you're a small character in a big world. Averly says they did face challenges having both first person and third person perspectives, but a lot of that work comes through the level design rather than the actual camera itself. They talk more about the scale, how a can opener looks very different, obviously when it's the size it is compared to the character. It's like a 2-story house, and there's a lot more emphasis on things to say there's something here that you've not noticed rather than something that you see every day. Goes on to say the creatures in particular are difficult. Mechanically complex creatures. They've tried to remain true to what a spider does move and look like, but they have had to gamify it slightly as well. If a spider in the game behaved exactly like a spider in real life, it would run 1,000 miles an hour, grab things and furiously wrap them up in half a second, which wouldn't make a very fun experience as a player. So we took some license in translating what's real, particularly in the creature animations and what can work as a gameplay experience. So the animations are particularly difficult. So here's some brand new info. There's going to be approximately a dozen different species of creatures around the early access launch. They're still confirming the numbers, but they're constantly trying to push and add as much content to the world as possible. They are going to be adding more throughout early access all the way up until 1.0 launch. They've got the grasshopper, the ladybird, several varieties of spider, but fireflies, butterflies, moths, several varieties of beetle, a lizard, dragonflies and damn self-flies. I have covered every creature so far revealed for SMALLAND. You go and check out that video, I'll leave it in the comment section down below. That was over a month ago now. They go on to say these are the key creatures you interact with at this stage in development. So it does look like most of these are going to be rideable. They have others in the works, but they're not quite ready to be shared yet. They then speak about the food chain, and this is something that Kev, the designer, spoke about when I interviewed him last year. The world is going to mimic most of the natural behaviours you see in the world. So a spider, if he sees any other creature, including other spiders, it may well attack him on sight. A ladybird isn't going to necessarily go aggro on anything, because there's nothing really below it. Then they speak about the wasps and bees having a specific relationship in nature. So this might lean into the faction stuff that they've emphasised in the past. Roughly half a dozen creatures will be tameable at launch, and the majority of those will be rideable as well. There's a few different benefits to tame creatures. Some may fight alongside you when you're attacking by something, so that's as kind of a territorial pet. Others could be used to bring you resources, but that's still something we're working on in secret. Creatures can be mounted, and they can be ridden around the world. We've seen the grasshoppers jump up and down. Dragonflies allow you to get over huge amounts of water because you can't technically swim. It doesn't look like they're adding that at the moment. Next question they ask about whether or not SMALLAND is going to be a harsh survival game like Ark, and effectively they're saying it's a lot less competitive. You're going to have to collaborate with players, so it's not going to be that player versus player nature as a major focus. But they do have some sort of plans, as it's listed on Steam, and I've been told by the developers before that there will be some sort of PvP element they add to it in the future. They don't want the game to be overbearing and too difficult. They don't want your base, like in Ark, being destroyed within 5 minutes. There is lots of threats in the world, but it's the lower end of the spectrum relative to other survival games. The good question is, what's the key to designing an interesting open world? One that just isn't big but worth exploring. So they do go on to re-emphasise they've got a narrative, as well as obviously the perspective of being small. There's going to be a quest system that will drive players into other areas. There will be resources that you can only get in other areas, so you will need to go and explore lots of the world to go and get access to more armours and weapons and stuff. Next question is talking about combat, and it's been something they've been focusing on for a while now. Not just with the bugs, but as I mentioned earlier, they do have some sort of plan for PvP in the far future. You move differently because of your scale, you're a bit lighter because of your strength to body weight ratio, but they do have the typical melee and range combat, both of which have been honing for PvE. They've got their own animation sets of course, and need to make sure that the same sword swing can be used on a small creature as well as a large one, and it makes sense. At the moment, PvP is optional. When you create a server or you join a server, you can have PvP enabled or disabled. We want the game to be collaborative, and we don't want players to accidentally shoot one another in the back of the head with a bow and arrow. So effectively friendly fire for now, although I don't think this is the end of their PvP plans. It's meant to be a bit of fun, just so you could have a little tournament with each other, bug fighting. You're not going to be blowing up each other's bases and stealing each other's bug parts, but they are going to expand on that in the future. They answer about their biggest challenge, and it was realising and changing the design multiple times. Like I said, the very first version was nothing really more than tech demo, so they effectively had to work on a lot of them visuals and ideas and actually make it. They've tried to stay true to the Kickstarter and the community, the people that backed it, and the idea is the game's going to sit somewhere between a single player RPG experience and an MMO, and it tries to tackle a lot of things. The developer also asks about the comparisons to Grounded. I'm not sure I totally agree with the answer here by the producer that Grounded feels more like a quite fixed RPG type experience and less in the survival space. It does have similar elements, and we never denied that when they announced Grounded over at Obsidian, it was very much a surprise, but we'll always welcome that kind of competition, and to have more games like that in the market, it's fantastic. But they've got this, quite fixed linear experience based around the robot that guides you through the narrative. It's 1 to 4 players, and it's very much made to be an RPG. They have more of a focus on quite a limited pool of crafting. No, not true at all. He carries on and says he doesn't want to bash it, but it's relatively confined. It's an RPG in a somewhat survival space. Dude, have you actually played Grounded? Grounded's got some great survival mechanics in it. Just because there is RPG and story elements, I would say that is what SMALLAND should be aiming for with its story. if it's a case of just a bare bones story, that's not really making for an interesting experience in a survival space for me. I don't really see the difference between what we've seen from clips, and it looks like there's quest givers in SMALLAND, to the quest giver that you get in the robot Burgle in Grounded. Each to their own with their opinion, but Grounded has got some fantastic survival mechanics in it. It's got a whole host of different crafting options, and while it's kind of limited in terms of you only usually use one big crafting bench, there's a whole other bunch of stuff that you need as well, like grinders, mixers, not to mention all the other stuff that collects resources for you. I'm sure SMALLAND will hopefully have some of that stuff as well, but I wouldn't say Grounded's limited at all. It's more focused for sure, it's got the story elements and that is going to set it apart from other games. No doubt about it, Grounded has got some really good survival credentials in it. The world feels alive, at any moment a bug or a spider can come and take you. It's a dangerous game playing it, especially on some of the harder difficulty settings. He then goes on to say SMALLAND's world is larger and will continue to expand as well. They've built their game to have very strict confines as to progression and where you can explore and very linear paths. We want our world to be a sandbox with as much opportunity and freedom for the player to choose how to explore and how to engage with it as they can. We're also a bit more true to the survival genre and offer a bit more of an organic simulation as well, in the way that our creatures in our world interact with the player. I don't know. I've literally just done my 10 big differences between Grounded and SMALLAND, and for sure some of what he's saying I have maybe included in here. But I do disagree quite a bit with some of these assertions. I'd wait until your game's out before making any comparisons. Grounded is one of the best survival games out there. Just because it has got advanced RPG or story mechanics in it doesn't make it less of a survival game. Every survival game under the sun usually has you level up some way, shape or form to either get more endurance or stamina. Grounded has that, but it just has it by collecting collectible teeth, and so then you put your stats in. So there are lots of crossovers between RPG and survival games, so yeah, it's a bit of a weird flex this interview. Being a good survival game doesn't necessarily mean just having a big open world to explore. I'll give him that for sure. A world that you have to go and get certain resources locked in certain laboratories does make Grounded a little bit more focused. So I guess maybe that's what he really meant when thinking about the sandbox nature of maybe SMALLAND. But it does give it that focus, and without that kind of focus, I feel like sometimes sandbox games can be pretty one note and boring. Grounded definitely has its flaws, and you can get bored of going through the same caves to go through the same processes each time. But there's nothing too different in other games. You normally have to go and explore other biomes to get resources to progress yourself. So it's still the same kind of deal. They then speak about what they're doing with their closed testing, how you can access the merge stuff. And I've been showing you guys that for ages. They're apparently testing some changes to creatures as well as a new prototype for a new player. And they're also testing different types of equipment that help you move. They've got their grappling hook, which they're hoping to help propel you forward. And they're wrapping up some of that story they talked about while leaving it open to continue developing during early access. They also added a couple extra creatures in the background, and they're going to continue to refine and polish all the experiences in the game's dressing. No news about when a release date is. I've been telling you guys I think it will be either a release date announcement in June, as that's when E3 kind of shenanigans are going on, even though E3's been cancelled. But that's when I expect to see some big traction and maybe the demo going live. A good little interview. It did clear up a few little things. Does raise some good topics and talking points about survival. And fair play, they've been honest and open enough about what he at least thinks about Grounded, its main competition, the differences between them, and even if I don't agree with it, it's nice to see a developer being honest. As ever, the home of Grounded, SMALLAND, and more crafty indie survival games like these. Make sure you're subscribed, and yeah, as soon as we get any news about the future of SMALLAND, I'll let you guys know.